After I finished my first book, A History of Boston and 50 Artifacts, I wanted to do another publication. I had created a list of the 100 oldest buildings in Boston. I shared it online and it got a lot of traction. So I put together another book proposal and now the book exists. Many of the books that try to look at the oldest buildings in Boston only look downtown, but they're also looking at the oldest, nicest buildings in Boston, and they'll start going into the 19th century. They're not actually a comprehensive list. So this book takes a look at the 50 oldest buildings, regardless of how good they look. But because of that, you get these very small single-family homes in outer neighborhoods of Boston that people may have driven by for decades and never noticed that they were 18th or even 17th century. The Elijah Jones house is my favorite house in the book, but it's mostly because of the challenges that went into actually getting the date of when it was built. What I was really fortunate ultimately was to get all the way back to the 1780s when Elijah Jones bought the house. So I actually managed to get probably the person that designed and built the house. No one remembered to tear it down, essentially, and it managed to survive for 300 years. The earliest histories of these stories really favor white upper-class men. We have to really work to get those underrepresented stories. We're in the Shirley Eustace house right now, and to me, that this house captures everything you can possibly capture about historic building and old buildings in Boston. It's a story of very prominent people, but it's not the most interesting part of the story because it also has a story of enslaved people. It has a story of women, it has a story of children.
With the research that we're doing on slavery at Shirley Place, we are able to tell a much fuller story. What's happening now with preservation and the goal to expand that history has made the field just tremendously exciting. The fact that we are helping to save a barn, or perhaps it was a slave quarters, we don't really know. You didn't even admit that people owned slaves in New England. And we have come so far now that we are embracing that story. Preserving sites like this helps us understand how we got to where we are today.
I'm doing this because someone who's been screaming in the past to be heard for centuries can be actually finally revealed. If we don't do that, then we lose relevance to the folks that are ultimately going to be voting to save these buildings. The George Haynes House is one of several late 18th century buildings right in this vicinity, but it's currently under threat. There's a proposal to have this house and the neighboring property demolished for a larger condo, but this is definitely one of the oldest buildings in Boston that's still remaining, that still represent the kind of mill industrial history of Boston and Lower Mills and Dorchester in particular.
Joe's book, and I think this was part of his intent, was to raise awareness. One way that we have failed to achieve equity and diversity in the buildings and sites and monuments that we designate are based on the inherent problem of the language of the legislation, that a building has to have above local significance. So the landmarking process favors neighborhoods that are better resourced.
Within a few weeks of publishing the book, one of the buildings was actually demolished, number 41, the Calvin Byrd House. The fact that the book exists now can be used to help save these buildings if they're ever under threat. And to that end, I'm actually working on a petition draft to landmark all of the buildings in this book that are not currently landmarked.
We're beginning to have conversations with our visitors about Joe's book and people who've told us, yes, I read about your house in Joe's book. And what's exciting about that is sort of to help put Roxbury on the map.
Joe has just been such an incredible spokesperson for Boston's history and Boston's archaeology. So we're grateful and lucky that he did it for us, for Boston.